Educated at the University of Rochester and at the Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton. He began his career at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He served as chief economist and senior managing director at Bear Stearns, and during the first Reagan term, he was the associate director for economics and planning in the Office of Management and Budget. He is currently a senior contributor at CNBC, where he hosted for a long time the Kudlow Report. He has a weekly syndicated radio show. He's a nationally syndicated columnist, contributing editor at National Review, and he's CEO of Kudlow and Company, LLC, an economic research firm. Last but far from least, he's a recipient of numerous awards, most of them related to his philanthropic work, including the Bishop's Humanitarian Award from the Catholic Charities of Brooklyn and Queens, the Humanitarian Award from the Pregnancy Care Center of New Rochelle, New York, and the Ambassadors for Mission Award from the Pontifical Mission Societies of the United States. It's an honor really to introduce you tonight to speak on the economic debates going on today, Mr. Larry Kudlow.
Thank you, appreciate it very much. It's a pleasure, honor to be here to help Hillsdale in any way that I can. Let me begin, as I was instructed by the organizers, to talk about the prospects of capitalism tonight, the prospects of capitalism. And if you know me, and if you've seen any of the stuff I've done on the air, you know I'm a quintessential optimist. So I will tell you, I think the prospects of capitalism are pretty good. Pretty good. They're not as good as I want them to be. We have a few issues, but they're pretty good. Let me make this caveat. And if you take nothing else away from this talk tonight, let me tell you this. If we want free markets and limited government and sound money and low taxes and deregulation and market choice and competition, if we want to be part of the great tradition of Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek or Ludwig von Mises or Arthur Laffer and many others, if we want to be optimistic about the great country of ours and the great economy of ours, you and I, are going to have to fight like hell to preserve it. They are not going to give it to us on a silver platter. They are trying to gobble up as much as they can. We kicked their butt in the last midterm election, but one never knows. Presidential politics is a funny thing. So, a thought. Since World War II, the U.S. economy, generally a free market economy, has grown at an average yearly rate of 3.3%. That's from roughly 1947 to 2000. Did you know that over the last century, from 1900 to 2000, I think that's 100 years, the U.S. economy has grown at an annual rate of 3.4%. Okay? That's pretty good. I'm going to argue that there is no nation in the history of history, no nation with a free market capitalist experiment in the history of history who has ever produced that kind of economic growth over that long a period of time, ever. Ever. And I will also say this, the great experiments of communism and Nazism and fascism and totalitarianism, and I'm going to talk more about totalitarianism in a few minutes. All those great experiments. And we're seeing a few of them now, redux. I thought when I was a young man working for Reagan, I put a spike into Maynard Keynes and redistribution and taxing the rich. I could have sworn I had him in the crypt. But I was wrong. He's back. But this is a fight worth preserving. Not only because of its track record, it's a fight worth preserving for the generations ahead of us, for the unborn. That's why this is so important. And as your president said, this is something that will not come easily, constitutionally, regulatorily, taxly, spendingly. This will not come easily. However, I'm a great believer that democracies breed free market capitalism. Now, you can argue, and you'd be right, that that is not always the case. Now, I will argue, of course, that democracies do not breed any sort of state planning and seizing the means of production. But you could point to Europe and say, well, they have democracies, but they don't really have much of a form of capitalism. They actually have some form of capitalism in Europe. It's their own little design. It doesn't work. They haven't grown in decades, but it's something. But we've had a lot of influence down through the years, particularly in the last 3 decades with Reagan and Thatcher putting into place the ideas of Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and the others I mentioned. And we've had some influence in Asia. In fact, I'll tell you a story in Asia. Now, I'm not going to point to China as a democracy. I will note, however, that the communist rulers have opened the economy up quite a bit. They've liberalized it in the direction of markets, in the direction of ownership. So much so that I don't believe that the communists will be able to remain in power. Once you let that genie out of the bottle, it usually can never be put back in. But we'll see. On the other hand, hundreds of millions of people have improved their lot in China, and so they now have a large, burgeoning middle class. The same thing is true in India. India is a democracy, thankfully, and it has a long history of socialist, bureaucratic underperformance of the economy. But nonetheless, in the recent decade or so, and maybe even more coming now with an open market guy, a free market guy running it, India, hundreds of millions of people have come to enjoy middle class status. This is new. They're basically following the Reagan-Thatcher model. That's what they're doing. And there's a long tradition of that in the United States and in the English-speaking countries. So that's what freedom will do. I have had my disagreements. I do a lot of service for the Catholic Church, quite true. Far be it from me to criticize the Pope, who doesn't share my zest for free market capitalism. And that's as strong as I'm going to get on that subject. But I was able to, I did get a call. You know, it's important if you're Catholic to get a call. I got a call from the Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Dolan. Okay, never met the guy before. And I sat down with a few of his people and some big church people, and we were talking about what to do with some of the Pope's proclamations about free market capitalism, and one guy in particular said, you know, Eminence, we're trying to raise $200-300 million here to fix the roof of the church. This is a noble enterprise, St. Patrick's Church. It's a landmark. It's very important, and people worship there. They don't want the roof to fall on their head. And this guy said it's very hard if the Pope keeps making these proclamations against rich people who are here to provide the $200-300 million to fix your roof. I see life, by the way, I'm not a theoretician, as it must be apparent. I see life in very practical, real-world terms. And so he said, I'm bringing Kudlow in here. I want you to meet Larry Kudlow, who believes in free market capitalism. And he'd like to talk to you. And I said, Eminence, look, I want you to write an op-ed piece. I'm not here to suggest that you're going to attack the Holy Father. But I am here to suggest that we can write you an op-ed piece that will provide a little more balance in the story. And I took out a graph, a chart, okay, from the World Bank, which is a left-wing organization, right? And the chart basically says, with great clarity, over the last 3 decades, which has been the rising tide of the spread of free market capitalism around the world, the rate of abject dollar-a-day poverty has fallen by 80%. 80%. That number is so big and so convincing of the merits of free market capitalism that it deserves at least some papal attention. Now, I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not here to talk about the Catholic Church. I could tell you jokes, and I'm not going to go there. It's much too serious an evening tonight. But, I'm proud of it, and it's working. And we go through periods of time in this country. Look, we've had periods of time when the country has moved to the left. But the good news is it never really stays to the left. Now, you may disagree with that. I appreciate that. We could probably debate some of that. But that is my particular view. Somehow, over the last 100 years, we've grown at almost 3.5% per year. And I think that's remarkable. I was chatting on air a week or two ago with my pal Glenn Beck. He was interviewing me on one thing or another. And he fancies himself a classical liberal, which is kind of a cool term, a classical liberal. I'd love to take their language away from them. I always have. So thank you. What's a classical liberal? We were kind of going on. He says, you're a classical. I said, yeah, well, it's Hayek, it's Milton Friedman. I was thinking, yeah, you know what? If I had lived in the 19th century, I would have been a Gladstonian. I would have been a follower of William Gladstone, 4-time liberal prime minister of Britain. What did he believe in? Well, it turns out a couple of guys from The Economist magazine had actually written a piece. I went and Googled it up, and they call it Gladstonian republicanism and said, the GOP should learn from Gladstone. It was 150 years ago, whatever. But he actually cut the size of the British government by 1/3 during a period when their economy expanded by 50%. Britain, ruled the waves and had the greatest economy in the world. He's slashing government, virtually abolishing taxes, virtually abolishing tariffs, and virtually abolishing regulations. Actually, the liberal in our welfare big government entitlement terms was Disraeli, and he was supposed to be the conservative. So Glenn Beck and I talked about the need for classical liberalism to return. And that's what I'm saying to you this evening. We can do this. If we know what we're doing, if we're well-rooted in the theory, if we know the difference between right and wrong, we can go after the bad guys. Look at what we've done. Don't talk to me about a couple bad years of stagnant middle-class wages. Okay, I get that. By the way, my pal Alan Reynolds just did a study and said the top 1% has lost money in the whole bunch of the last years, too. You can't have a healthy economy without rich people. Can I just say that? You cannot have a healthy economy without someone succeeding. All right? Someone has to succeed in order to create wealth. I don't know President Obama. We had dinner with President Obama just before the inauguration at George Will's house. It's a tradition, George, because he's George Will, and there were 9 or 10 of us, conservative yappers, and we met the president, who was charming and sort of humorous, well turned out. He was humorous until Krauthammer went at him, and then he kind of lost his sense of humor. But I asked about marginal tax rates. He was talking 40s on the way to 50. Bill Kristol or somebody asked him about health care, And he was talking about his grandmother's hip or something and how the state took care of it. And I knew we were in for trouble. I knew right then and there. But look, it's not stopping progress. It's not stopping progress. It's weakened it, it's slowed it, but it's not stopped it. And the whole issue of freedom and rewarding success is never going to be stopped. It is in the very roots of democracy, the very roots of democracy, the very roots of constitutional rule. So I have a simple definition. I want low marginal tax rates. Hell, I take a single tax, flat tax any day of the week. I want government cut to the bone. I want regulations as light as possible. And I want sound money, a reliable dollar, so people can invest here. And of course, I want the rule of law. And the president has violated pretty much all of those things. But there is some good news. As this term comes to an end, I notice the dollar is going up. This is good. And as many of us have argued for many years, as the dollar goes up, the price of oil goes down. This is also good. This is helping middle-class people because their dollars will be worth more. And all commodities are going down, and food prices are going down, along with energy and gasoline prices. So even though the president encouraged the Fed to create $4.5 trillion new dollars in their balance sheet and hates fossil fuel, we are benefiting because the Federal Reserve has finally stopped printing money, and fossil fuel has created one of the great technological energy revolutions in our history. And so oil prices are closer to 50 than 150. And I don't mind if the president takes credit for that. The presidents do, but he didn't have a bloody thing to do with it. But it's just happening because we are basically still a free market democracy and a free market economy. And guys like Harold Hamm going up to North Dakota and saying, I can frack, I can do horizontal drilling. Nobody believed him. He did it anyway, and that's still the great spirit of free market capitalism. It is alive and well. Look, in our lifetime, we've gone from industry to technology and information and the internet. In our lifetime. Do you know how important that is? And we led the way. We, the U.S., led the way. You know why? Because we were free to do so. And you know what else? People who led this revolution were able to get rewards for their successful risk-taking and entrepreneurship. That's what happened. And as long as that model survives, my pal Arthur Brooks, who runs the American Enterprise Institute, writes about this, wonderful stuff, the immorality of punishing success and the morality of rewarding success. As you know from the Declaration of Independence, we are created, our Creator endowed us with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the pursuit of happiness part that interests me a lot. Life, yes. Liberty, yes. Pursuit of happiness means you are free to fail or succeed. And in so doing, you will produce great things that nobody believed possible. And I don't ever, ever want to lose that freedom. And that's why I say to you tonight, the outlook for free market capitalism is pretty good, but you're going to have to fight like hell. They're going to come at us in the next election, and then the next midterm election. We thought we drove a spike into Keynesianism and redistributionism 30 years ago. We did not. So we'll just keep fighting away with good arguments, persuasive arguments, numerical arguments, okay? Numerical arguments. But I think the tide is turning. It's moving in our direction. We have much more work to do, but I notice, along with the oil drop and the dollar rise, jobs are getting better, wages are picking up. This is because the instinct of our economy is to grow. Business is very resilient. Despite the fact that you have an anti-business president, breathtakingly anti-business president. I'll give you an example of this. I'm an economist, I won't quote constitutional stuff. The president says he wants corporate tax reform. My belief right now is the single most important thing that would help the American economy in the short run would be slashing of the corporate tax rate and an end to the double taxation of foreign profits parked overseas. Single best thing we could do. And if you had that, big tax cut, marginal tax rate cut, and an improving dollar, that would give the Fed cover to do what it needs to do to try to get its affairs back in order so they can write a good check again. Now, so Obama says, yeah, I'm for corporate tax reform. Then he goes and State of the Union message, and then he puts out his budget. He says, well, you know, I don't really like those multinationals that send their money abroad. They're unpatriotic. So here's the deal. If they bring their money home, it's about $2 trillion worth. So $2 trillion is a lot of money. The whole economy is only about $17 trillion. If they bring their money home, I will tax them at 19% for the first year and then 14% thereafter. I think that's right. Or is it 14% and 9%? 19% and 14%. That's a lousy, you know what, they can do that now. The way the system works, you pay about 25% overseas, right? We're 35, you pay 25% overseas. You get to deduct that from your 35%, but you still have to pay 10% if you bring the money home, so it's taxed twice. Obama says, I'm going to give you a big break and tax you at 14%. 10 is as high as they can go. That's the break-even point. The current system, as bad as it is actually better than the one he's proposing. And he says he's for corporate tax reform. I think that's, well, I don't know what I think about that. He must think, to use the words of one of his advisors, that Americans are stupid. Well, we are not. We are not. And my pal and yours, Paul Ryan, is going to go after that. And we'll see if we can't do better. And hopefully it'll be an election that will, thank you, on behalf of Paul, whom I've known for many years. Thank you. All right. Let me raise a couple of other points, and then I want to take your questions. I don't get out much. I'm dying to hear what's on your mind. As much of a believer of economic incentives and free markets and choice as I am, as much as I acknowledge the need to roll back Obamacare and substitute market choice and competition, as much as I want to reform the entitlement state, as much as I want to reward success rather than punish it, I want to raise two issues that are, they're economic, yes, but they're not economic. One of them is the issue of marriage. Marriage. Stay with me on this, okay? Stay with me on this. Every study shows, left of center, right of center, virtually every study shows that married people have higher incomes and greater wealth than unmarried people. And by the way, as a practical guy who's had his ups and downs in life, I can just say to you, if you are divorced, you can get remarried for a long time, okay? It'll stick. Mine's 27 years and growing. They also show that probably the single biggest cause of poverty is broken families, unmarried and broken families. And third, they show that the government is subsidizing broken families, fatherless families. In fact, the government is even subsidizing situations where two people live under the same roof, but neither of them work, they have kids, and the government subsidizes that. So what I'm here to say, and it's a theme I've been developing for many months, the culture of marriage is one of the most important economic solutions possible, as well as an inherently moral solution as well. And we should do everything we can, whether it's cultural or tax or economic or entitlement, to change this. I want every presidential candidate to tackle the issue of marriage and family breakup and the federal government's role in that. And it turns out the government plays an important role in that. The last Democrat I worked for, whoops, I'm an ex-Democrat. A lot of Reagan people were ex-Democrats. Last Democrat I worked for is Senator Pat Moynihan, who wrote a study about this regarding black families and their pathologies. He wrote that in the mid-'60s. He was completely trashed by the academic institutions. He was completely and utterly right. Read Jason Riley in the Wall Street Journal. Now he's gone over to the Manhattan Institute. He was on my radio show this past week. He wrote a brilliant op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal about this very fact, about this very fact. And it isn't only a black problem, it has become a white problem, as Charles Murray has taught us, and it has been a brown problem. In other words, it's just a problem. We need more healthier, longer marriages, okay? For the kids, yes, and for society. On this point, I'll just close one last point. I call Kudlow 101. Very simple. If you're a child of a broken family, it's predictable that you are going to fail and may be enmeshed in poverty and have no upward social mobility. And I hate that. I hate the thought of that. So my advice, and I mentor and I sponsor. I'm in 12-step programs. I'm in community programs. First, go to school. Go to school every day. Get your high school diploma, and then go on a bit. I don't care if you go to a four-year college or not. Get a technical degree, learn to fix things. There's great money in that. Whatever suits you. You don't have to go to Princeton. I went to Princeton. By the way, I just want to digress for 1 minute. It is my great hope that the next president in the United States will not have an Ivy League degree. Oh, it's my great hope. I'm already agitating for a law. My pal Rand Paul and others want to have rules to audit the Federal Reserve. I got a better one for the Federal Reserve. Pass a law that says any Ivy League economist with an econometric model is automatically disqualified for holding the post. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. I've been there and I've done that. But I digress. I want the kid to go to school and get some skills. Then I want he or she to get a job. And I want them to hold the job for a bunch of years like we did. Okay? You start the bottom ladder, you work your way up. That's a very American notion. I don't want to ever lose that. That is as precious as free market capitalism. Indeed, it is a cornerstone of free market capitalism. So hold on to a job. Then start dating. Now, my wife calls it doing research. All right? Living together, jumping into bed together, we've tried that. Sometimes it works. More than 50% of the time it doesn't work. Just get to know each other, then get married. And be married for several years with a job for a bunch of years, and then have the kid. Okay? The trouble with today's story is it's being done backwards. They have the kid first, before the marriage, before the job, before the education, and it is most regrettable. This has to be changed. To me, as a guy who has fought for economic freedom and lower marginal tax rates and deregulation and a sound dollar my entire adult life, this marriage thing is looming larger and larger. The more I read, the more I'm convinced. That's why I present it to you. And my final point this evening is on international policy, okay? This is terribly important, too, as you know. Reagan used to argue, I'm just reading Annalise Anderson's book, her dear husband, these are dear friends of mine. Marty just passed away, but they put out this big, great book about Reagan's great decisions. Reagan used to always argue, weakness at home leads to weakness abroad, but strength at home leads to strength abroad. When your economy is solid at home, you have the resources to produce the national security and meet your commitments. If you draw lines in the sand, then you meet that commitment. Unfortunately, today, we have a soft economy. We're not generating the resources. Our friends don't respect us, and our enemies don't fear us. This is a terrible situation, but it can be fixed. It can be fixed. As long as we understand the stakes are very high. That's all I'm getting at. My friend and frequent guest on the Kudlow Report and on the radio show, General Jack Keane, started me on this. He compared this battle with the Islamic jihadist radicals and the rest of the world as a battle reminiscent of the battle between freedom and communism in the last century. And I just raised it up and said, General, can I just call this a battle between freedom and totalitarianism? That's what this is. It's not just about one country or one border. This is about a whole movement that wishes to destroy us, our way of life, and our principles, and our constitutions, and everything else. We cannot allow this to happen. We need a plan, but we need resolve. We need an economy, and we need resolve, and we need a plan. I will recommend to you a book written by the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson. It's called The Churchill Factor. Book's an easy read. He just reminds us, Mr. Johnson reminds us, he says Churchill was the most important figure in the 20th century. The most important figure in the 20th century. Why? Because when Britain and the world needed him, he was there to fight totalitarianism. We didn't know at that point. It looked like Nazism, but it could have been communism, et cetera, et cetera. And if he didn't fight it, nobody else would. Meaning no disrespect, but FDR in the USA wasn't there politically yet. Meaning a lot of disrespect, the leaders of Churchill's own party were a bunch of appeasing wusses. On the other hand, the nobility of Britain, half of them were Nazi sympathizers. You know, they figured Hitler might come in, put his guy in charge nominally, but they would continue to live the great life that they thought they were living. Wrong. Wrong. We should never kid ourselves about the evils of totalitarianism, ever. So God bless, there was Winston Churchill, a guy who had, seen bullets in several wars, who understood, and he fought, and he stood up, and he had a lot of courage. I don't know who the Churchill is today. I don't know that. Not smart enough to know. I know that there are a bunch of very smart, conscionable, free market-oriented Republican governors who are going to fight it out for the nomination to be president. And I think that's good. As somebody who believes in free market competition, I say, let the games begin. I want to see the debates, et cetera, et cetera. All I ask is that the next leader take account of history lessons, both recent and in the past. We can grow this economy at 3.5% to 4%, like we have for the last 100 years, if we reward success and choose free market choice over government statism and entitlements, okay? That's one point. We can achieve 3.5% to 4% growth if we pull back on regulations and if we lighten the tax burden and we keep the dollar sound. We can do this. If we observe constitutional rules of law and order, we can do this. We know how to do this. If we have an ear and a sense of the importance of a conservative, traditional culture of marriage, we can do this. And then if we have, finally, a sense of the importance of the battle that is going on internationally between freedom and totalitarianism, we can do this. My message to you at the end of this talk, as it was at the beginning, I'm an optimist, but you and I must fight like hell in order to win. Thank you for inviting me. You're way too kind. I'm most grateful. There's nothing I've said that your president wasn't talking about in his own way, and will continue. It's such an honor for me to be able to address Hillsdale College. With permission from our officials and moderators and whatnot, I would love to take a few questions. Like I say, I don't get out much. This is a hell of a crowd. I don't think I've ever seen so many free market conservatives under one roof before. So God bless you. If I had it to do over again, I'd swap my Princeton degree for yours, believe me. And I will do penance by going out there and actually seeing Hillsdale. I'm anxious to actually see it and meet the kids who are the most important. Anyway, please, if you have a question or a disagreement, go right ahead. Yes, sir.
Here we go. Your comments on marriage were good, but there's some issues there sometimes.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
Is that better? Hello? Everyone can hear me except you, sir. Anyway, your comments on marriage were good.
Thank you.
But there's other issues sometimes. You mentioned the fellow Mr. Ham, right?
Right.
And he has some issues, with divorce. So I'm being a little facetious, but everything is not always, perfect. And I guess my point is, it's kind of goofy, but this is really, travesties of justice in that arena also, okay?
I suppose so. I don't know. Like I say, it's about progress, not perfection. If you swing at the ball and hit a ground out, you can come back again and get a base hit. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. You all know what I mean. I'm not here to morally judge anybody. Lord knows. You're talking to a Catholic convert who, with the help of God, completely changed his life 20 years ago. So I am not here to take your inventory. All I'm saying is that in the economic zone, in the economic sphere, it's not just about tax cuts and regulations. And I'm expressing my worry that we are creating permanent poverty pockets and a lack of upward social mobility. And I'm saying to you that the evidence, the data, are now coming in an overwhelming manner, that the decline of the culture of marriage and the decline of marriages and the increase in family breakup has had a devastating effect on the kids, on the families, and on our economy. That's what it's saying.
Mr. Kudlow, how is it that the theories of Samuelson and the others on dealing with deficits and the way to grow the economy, which you thought you nailed down completely before, how is it they can still keep coming to the fore? And what method could you propose for economists to develop a definitive program for what grows the economy and what doesn't, to the level it's on a sort of a scientific basis rather than an emotional basis?
It's a great question, sir. It's a very important question. And, people with greater economic credentials than I have puzzled with this question. The evidence, I would argue the evidence is clear. You're implying you agree with that. The evidence is clear. I mean, look, in our life, let me just go back 1 second. I'm working with a co-author to write a book about John F. Kennedy's tax cuts. Did you know that Kennedy was really the first post-World War supply-sider? He lowered marginal tax rates. Actually, he cut taxes for rich people, middle-income people, corporations, capital gains, dividends. He was the last Democrat, really, to do so, except Bill Clinton, who was pushed into it by Newt Gingrich, but I'll give Clinton credit, too. Anyway, we had a boom in the 60s. Before we destroyed the dollar in the late end, we had a boom, one of the best booms in American history. In the 1980s, we lowered marginal tax rates, limited government. By the way, Kennedy was a stickler for the budget. He was a budget restraint guy. There may not have been everything about him that we like and love, but on these issues, he got and he, by the way, insisted that the dollar stay as good as gold. Okay? He's my kind of guy. Sorry I never met him. Similar principles were laid down in the 80s, and similar principles were laid down in the 90s. So this is all in our lifetime. And we had huge booms. I always love it when my friends on the left tell me how bad lowering marginal tax rates is. You know, Bill Clinton, he raised the rate from whatever, 31 to 40, yeah, but he also lowered the capital gains rate from 28 to 20 and reformed welfare and passed a free trade bill and had Graham Rudman and a bunch of other budget restraints that Gingrich and the Republicans worked with him on. My pal and I, Steve Morris, one night we were on the radio together, and in the 80s and 90s, which Obama has trashed, he said none of that stuff worked. He calls it all trickle down. In the 80s and 90s, the United States created almost 50 million new jobs in 20 years. The expansion of our economy was greater than the total gross domestic product of any European country during that period. In fact, the expansion of our GDP is almost greater than the whole size of the European Union. And we did this in 2 decades under sound policies, what I will simply call free market economics, Gladstonian liberalism, Milton Friedman, whatever, choose your, Friedrich Hayek. So don't tell me. I mean, Obama actually calls it all trickle down. Now, the 1970s, where we employed spending and tax hikes and inflation and wage and price controls, of course under Republican, had to be just great, Richard Nixon. I'm sure he's a fine man. I met him a few times, but he was an economic moron, and there's nothing we can do about that. It's history. But they lined up, actually I'll throw in LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Carter, producing every Keynesian trick in the bag. And this country suffered mightily with inflation and unemployment rising together. And by the way, it damaged us enormously overseas. In the current situation, look, I believe Republicans and Democrats, frankly, are pretty equally to blame. I mean, since 2000 or 2001, we've grown by less than 2% a year. We've had Republican president and Democrat president. We have Republican Congress and Democrat Congress. We've grown by less than 2% a year. You can look it up. And we've tried the same funny business, targeted tax credits and increases of spending and subsidies and destroying the value of the dollar. Overregulation. What did I hear at dinner? You can't get a loan if you're in the gun business. You actually can't hardly get a loan. Maybe it's just beginning to start now. C&I loans are starting to rise. Dodd-Frank has completely transmogrified and stultified the entire banking business to the point where bankers don't want to take risk anymore. Bankers are in the business of taking risks. But if you lose on the risk, you lose money. And if you lose money, you know what? One of our cherished legal traditions, if you lose money on a consistent basis, you go bankrupt. Hello, bankrupt. We have laws and judges. Whatever happened to that? You have regulators standing over the shoulders of every banker so they won't make a so-called bad loan. The EPA is trying to stop the very revolution of fossil fuels that has given us now energy independence, world dominance, and better economic growth. I don't need to go on and on and on. I'm just saying, you are right, sir. The trouble with that is it just never seems to end. You know? And we've got some pretty good people on our side. The chairman of the economics department of Harvard University, Greg Mankiw, is a good guy. He's a terrific guy. Served under W as the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. He said it's become obvious now, the difference between right and wrong. The chairman, the dean of the Columbia Business School, Glenn Hubbard, who was also a former CA chairman under W. Larry Summers, who was really kind of a moderate Clinton, Rubin, conservative guy. in the 90s comes back under Obama and sounds like John Kenneth Galbraith or something like that. Who is Ken Galbraith? Never mind, it's not even important. He was a big lib who spent more money. I don't know what to tell you. The battle goes on. Look, at the end of the day, it's real easy in a way. At the end of the day, it's a political question. And at the end of the day, come back to what I said to you before. You go fight like hell. All right? This is democracy. America is a great democracy. It's one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic. When America sees things going really badly, it makes changes, makes management changes through the ballot box. And that's the way this thing's going to be settled. That's the only way. But I will say this to you, sir. It's pretty clear now that we know what to do. You and I and a few others in this room could sit down and fix the economy in 25 minutes. Honestly, we know what to do. The foreign policy thing is much more difficult. Much more difficult. But we know the difference between right and wrong. And I want these guys... How we lost in 2012, I will never understand that. It was worse than Dewey and Truman, honest to God. You have to stand up and tell the voters what you believe in. You know, that's the essence of politics. It's like, I'm reading in the newspapers how Jeb Bush has got all this money locked up in the nomination. By the way, I like Jeb Bush. It's not about Jeb Bush. But I'm just saying that idea, which we saw 4 years ago with Mitt Romney, he was a fine man, terrible politician, and all this money locked up. You know, remember that I hear it on the radio. We're at some kind of anniversary of the Beatles. Remember the Beatles? Money can't buy you love. Think about that as a political axiom. Money can't buy you love. You know what buys you love? Message, beliefs, and the character and strength, like a Churchill, to stand up and fight for it, regardless of whatever short-term political problems may exist. So we have a group, as I said, it's called the Committee to Unleash American Prosperity. It's started by Steve Forbes, myself, Steve Moore, and Art Laffer. We're forming a committee of very distinguished businessmen and women and academics, and we are asking these candidates to come to meetings. We started the first couple in New York, we're going to go around the country to have more, where they will be directly, it's not a debate, they will sit down, have a nice little supper, and will directly answer questions from knowledgeable, distinguished people. That's what we're going to do. I want that done. I want to know, I have so much respect for these guys. I've known them for years, all of them. I want to hear them say what I want to hear them say. You know what I mean? I want to hear them say what I want to hear them say. I don't want to fence around it. I don't want to hedge around it. I don't want to say one thing on the debate and the next night have my press guy say I didn't believe it. I don't want any of that crap. I want clear thinking and message. You know what? Here's an awful thing. Here's an awful thing. In terms of message, in 2012, Obama's left-wing message was a lot clearer. He was the optimist. Our guy, and I interviewed him, I love him. I love him. He was so good to me. I probably interviewed him 5 or 6 times. I would sit across from him knee to knee, and I, to this day, couldn't tell you what he really believes in. And I'm probably smarter than your average bear. I couldn't tell you. Obama, on the other hand, had his talking points. You see his guys, campaign managers on Charlie Rose last night? God, eat your heart out. They're so clever. Why can't we do that? Conservatives, here's what we believe in. That's what's going to win. The academic studies, sir, you are right, but I don't know, it hadn't happened in my lifetime and probably never will. Other questions? I love this. Come on, fire away. Disagree, yell at me. It's okay. I do this for a living. Yes?
The American populace seems to want, can you hear me up there, Mr. Kudlow? American populace seems to want Congress, the left and the right, to legislate from the middle. In your opinion, are our countries solvable from in the middle?
Well, all depends where the middle is, I guess. You know, this is a right-of-center country, has been for a long time. My former boss, Ronald Reagan, used to say the following. He said two things. One, if you and I agree on 80% of an issue, and we disagree on 20%, we are not enemies. And number two, Reagan would say, give me a half a loaf now, and I'll get the other half later. I was in the room. I was a kid, you know. I didn't sit at the cabinet table. I sat at the chair against the wall. I heard him. Now, Reagan made a lot of deals. Not all of them were good. He knows that, said so in his memoirs, particularly the 82 spending deal, which he never got spending cuts. For some minor tax hikes, but blah, blah, blah. 81, he made a brilliant deal on taxes and spending. 83, they salvaged Social Security for 4 decades. 86 on tax reform. These are all deals. There were deals on the MX missile. There were deals on setting up the intermediate missiles in Europe. I don't want to go through all the deals. Reagan was one of the greatest labor negotiators in history. People forgot that. The guy ran the Screen Actors Guild. He was president of the Screen Actors Guild 7 times. He conducted, to this day, he led the only strike of the Screen Actors Guild against the movie, in those days, the movie bosses, the only strike ever. I'm still a member of the Screen Actors Guild because I did a bunch of commercials years ago. I don't recommend it. It's not my kind of crowd, but Reagan ran it 7 times. So he knew how to face down Louis Mayer. And in that sense, Tip O'Neill is nothing. So in answer to your question, I don't know where the middle is. I think the middle is a lot further to the right than other people may. I'm not afraid to make a deal, as long as you don't give up your principles. Such a thing is possible. Presidents have done this before. I mean, this guy in the White House, he doesn't even want to sit down with you. Look, you go back to 2011. This is probably very unpopular, but I'm going to stand up for my old friend, John Boehner, who was an original Kemp supply sider. Jack Kemp was my mentor. Boehner had a deal with Obama on deficits, entitlements, and taxes. Not tax rates, but tax revenues from growth. He had a deal in 2011. He walks out of the White House, and then they hear next hour or two that the deal's been changed and Obama wanted another $400 billion in taxes. He knew he was breaking the deal. He did it purposely to avoid the deal. And since then, we have not had a good sit-down. That was the end of it. You know, this is the tragedy of the story. Reagan would never let that happen. You know, people say how Tip O'Neill, this and that. Let me just tell you, I knew Tip O'Neill. I knew his staff, his speechwriters. Tip O'Neill was no Ronald Reagan. Reagan rolled O'Neill continuously. You know why? We had the votes. We had a majority in the Senate for 6 years, and we didn't have the House, but we did have the House because then conservative, boll weevil Democrats voted Reagan. So we could command 260, 70 votes on every roll call, kick Tip O'Neill's ass, and get a decent deal done. All right? So I'm like yearning for those days. And I think somehow one of these governors, I really do want a governor. I think the first-term Senate model has been tried and found lacking. I want a governor. And I believe from one of them will come such a person. Why do I believe that? A, because I believe in America and its democracy. B, because I believe in God. I'm going to wind it up right there. Thank you very much.